welcome everyone. I'll just give a brief background to the project. Some of you might be wondering, what's this strange NWA word in the title for this workshop. The text annotation workshop was basically conceived by our team within the context of this NWA project, or NWA Idea Generator Grant, which we were awarded last year. So the title of the project is Catch Me If You Can, Mapping EU Company Mobility and Abuse Detection. And essentially, the goal for this project is to create a technical infrastructure for the collection and analysis of data about EU companies and their cross-border movements in the EU. So companies frequently merge and divide and convert themselves across borders in the EU. And so our team has been collecting this information over a long period of time, about 15 years. And we are basically constructing this infrastructure for managing that extraction and analysis of the data. And we're doing it together with these two partners. So the European Trade Union Institute, and our contact person there is Alina Hoffman, who you see there in the slide, as well as Risk Search Technologies, as Rita mentioned earlier. And our contact person there is Diana Mitroy. The ancestor project to this NWA project is called the Cross-Border Company Mobility Project. And this was initiated way back in 2006 by Marcus Mayer, who you see in the slide, together with his colleague Thomas Biermeier from the Faculty of Law. And so they've been collecting this information for a long period of time now on cross-border company mobility. And they've been also interested in the impact of these companies' movements on employees and work rights and so on. And the Institute of Data Science got involved in 2018, myself and some colleagues there, Pedro Hernandez, Sean Adekunle, and Ramsey Chelibi. We got involved to basically help with streamlining that extraction process of the data and the management of that data so that things go much smoother and quicker. What is the role of text annotation in our project? The idea here is that the information that we collect about these companies are gathered from legal documents. And currently, the way we do this is student assistants actually read the legal documents manually and then record the information that's relevant for us in these online web forms. And there are a couple of limitations to that. One being that it's difficult to control for consistency in how two different student assistants represent the same data. Some student assistants type in the information differently than others, and that has downstream effects in the database where we'd have to reconcile those differences in how they represent that data and do some cleaning on that information. And that takes time. And what we'd like to do is streamline that process and use text annotation, where we record the relevant information that we need from the document directly in the document using software. And that's the kind of main idea behind this tool that we developed in this workshop and that we're going to demo in this workshop as well. What is text annotation? I guess it's a very basic question to ask, but it's very important, right? So to align on that. So what you mean by text annotation is adding notes to textual documents that communicate additional tacit or implicit information in the text. So information that's not actually explicitly there, but maybe that we can glean from it, that we can sort of infer from it. That's interesting for some research that we want to do or analysis that we want to do. Or we want to make comments on the contents. So text annotation can be done digitally using software, or it can be done by pen and paper. And here you see two screenshots of tools that we use, which is similar to the tool that we're going to demo in this workshop for annotating text online. And you can see here on the bottom left picture, you can see that there's a piece of text, and you can see some text is highlighted with different colors. And the tags, what we call tags, there are, like, for example, person, country, city, album, song, and they describe certain categories of entities that we find in the text. Just for terminology there, we call these categories that we highlight with person, country, etc. We call those annotation tags. But why would we want to annotate text in the first place? Here are some general examples why this would be interesting. So communicating and discussing discussing of textual documents between humans, right? So for example, we want to give our opinions on certain news articles or blog posts online. Sometimes communication happens between lecturers and students when we grade their exams or test papers and assignments. We write down little notes to communicate why we gave a certain grade and so on. And then we also want to record this tacit knowledge when we want to do research. An example could be when teachers annotate Shakespeare's plays, for example, for studying themes and character development and plot significances. And then the more interesting one from our perspective is using text annotation labels to create what we call labeled data sets that we can use for machine learning and natural language processing algorithms downstream, where we basically give examples of identifying certain pieces of information from the text to a machine learning algorithm, and that algorithm can learn how to automatically perform this classification or identification later on in future unseen text. Our project is one example of using text annotation, but there are many other various projects which are also employing text annotation for various purposes. One example is the Science in the Classroom, which is an initiative by the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And essentially there they work with universities to annotate research articles, where basically the educators or lecturers annotate research articles with additional information to help students learn or achieve the learning objectives in a course. So sometimes you frequently have to read research papers in courses, students have to read them, but the connection between the content of those papers and the learning objectives of the courses is sometimes a bit blurry. And teachers in this project, they actually annotate those research articles with additional information to help the students learn the content of those articles. And then you also have examples in the biomedical domain where medical texts are annotated with disease names and medical drugs and so on for the purposes I mentioned earlier, for machine learning purposes, so that algorithms can learn this in the future. In the legal domain, you have, for example, Claudette, and Ruta worked on this project before as well, where you annotate terms of service agreements. So I'm sure lots of you use like Spotify and Netflix and so on, and services like these, where they have a legal document which shows you the terms of service, the terms of use of the service. And you can copy and paste that text into this tool, and it can automatically identify what is potentially unfair legally in those articles. And now we turn to Hypotheses, which is the tool which we're going to use in this workshop for annotating our text. Hypotheses is a free and open source text annotation tool, and it's available as a Chrome browser plugin. So we're going to use it as that. We're going to download it and install it for you. And the focus initially, when the development of this tool started, is on annotating the web. So annotating websites, web pages, and things like that, so people can discuss content on the web. But you're also able to annotate PDF documents as well. So that's a neat feature which was added a little bit later on in its development. And we can test that out as well today for some of you who brought PDF documents to annotate. And one of the great advantages to Hypotheses is it allows you to annotate the data where it is. So frequently, if the information is online in a research article that's online or in a PDF document, you can annotate it directly there instead of extracting that information, having to process it, having to extract text from different sources and collect them together. You annotate the data where it is. Those annotations are stored in the cloud, and then you can extract that and analyze it as you so wish later on. So in the context of the NWA project, what we did was we built an extension, a modification to this Hypotheses tool to serve our purposes on our project, to make our lives a little bit easier on the project, because we had a little bit of additional, let's say, requirements that we needed to collect data in our project that the default Hypotheses couldn't really do very well. So we wanted to extend it to do that. We call this the Hypotheses Custom Tags extension, and we will now install it. What I would like all of you to do is, step number one is, if you don't have the Chrome browser installed, you can install this using the link up here, which Marcus will share with you via the chat feature. While you're installing that, the next step is after you've installed Chrome, it should take you a few seconds, by the way, to install Chrome. The next step is to install the Hypothesis custom tags extension. And the instructions for that differ very slightly between Windows and Mac. And the installation instructions are in the following links in the slide. Marcus will also share these with you on the chat. There are 5 steps in total. I'll open it up on my screen so you can also follow along and see if you are in the same document as me. Can you see my screen with the instruction document? Yes? Okay. Yeah, so the document should look like this. So follow those steps. There are 5 or 6 steps, and it should literally take you a matter of 5 minutes, even less, to install. If you need any assistance, we can create a breakout room and we can assist you with more specific details because we have some time allocated for this. I think it's 20 minutes, right, Ruta?
Yeah, that's correct. So let's see how long it takes.
Yeah. And just raise your hand in the chat if you need specific help with that. Maybe I can walk through the Windows one because I'm on a Windows machine and maybe it'll help go a little bit faster for those who have a Windows machine. So I already have Hypothesis installed, but I follow the instructions. So first thing is to download this zip file with the extension. I've already done that, so it's already on my machine. Next step is to extract that archive to any folder on my computer. I've extracted it to this folder. Once it's extracted, it looks like this, the contents of the folder. The next step is to open Chrome and go to the Extensions tab. And you can do this in 2 ways. One is click on the top right corner with the 3 dots. Go to More Tools, and then Extensions. And it should take you to a window like this. Alternatively, you can type in Chrome : /extensions, and then you get to the same page. I already have Hypothesis installed here, but the instructions say you have to make sure if you have developer mode enabled. I already have developer mode enabled on the top right of the screen. Step 4, if you already have default Hypothesis, I already have Hypothesis installed here, so I can remove it. I'll remove it. And the next step is to load unpacked. So I click on Load Unpacked in the top left. I then navigate to the folder where I extracted Hypothesis to. And I click Select Folder. And Hypothesis will load up on the screen. Step 6 also is important for those who want to annotate PDF files. What you do is you go to the Extensions tab, you click on Details under Hypothesis, and then you scroll down to where it says Allow access to file URLs, and then make sure that it's checked. And then you're done, and you're now ready to annotate PDFs and web pages.
Okay, Cody, I think maybe for some of the people, we could have a breakout room if we want to go a bit slower. Maybe Corinne, Marcus, if you could allocate Alex and Corinne in a breakout room, and I'll join as well. Also, the ones who have managed to successfully upload it, if you could just let us know in the chat so we have an indication of how many people are done already. Okay, Alex is the first one. Great.
Also, another indication here is once you've installed, to make sure that you have the correct version of Hypothesis, make sure that it says 1.637 here. That's how you know you have the right version. If it says 1.799, you have the wrong version, then you should try and reinstall. So remove it and reinstall again. Yes, I see some information in the chats about having version 1.799. If you have that, you have to remove it and then reinstall again. Make sure that you have Hypothesis version 0.8 downloaded. Just let me know if you have 0.7 rather than 0.8. It should be 0.8. Remember not to restart Chrome. So after you install the plugin, just stay in Chrome. You don't have to restart the browser in order to use Hypothesis. Caroline asks if she needs to sign up. Yes, so that's step 3 exactly. So after you've installed Hypothesis, the last step is to sign up if you don't have an account on Hypothesis. Otherwise, if you do, just log in. So if you are done with all 3 steps, please raise your hand in the chat. Okay, I see Pedro is done. Caroline is done.
Cody, Diederik is writing in the chat that he had 1.799 and now he has 1.637.
Yes, that's correct.
That's correct, okay.
1.637 is the correct one. Ruta, how are we doing with time?
Yeah, we're good with time. We can make a couple of more minutes. So we have a couple of participants having issues. So let's give them some time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I was busy trying to register. So I didn't hear what happens if you have the wrong version, because I have 1.799. Do I need to do?
You would need to reinstall again. And to do that, all you need to do is click, if you follow my screen, click on remove here.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, load unpacked and reload it again.
Okay, but it's going to be from the same folder. So it's going to be the same version.
Yes, this is an issue with Chrome. What Chrome does, for some reason, automatically, it updates all the extensions every time you restart or refresh Chrome.
I see. I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, thanks. So apart from Caroline and Pedro, who else is done with all 3 steps?
I think I'm done. Well, for PDFs, the only thing you need is to authorize it for URLs.
Yes.
I'm afraid that I missed some steps, actually. I don't see an indication of the version.
Ah, okay. Do you see a black icon or a red icon next to Hypothesis?
A red one.
Okay, then you have the right one.
Okay.
Yeah. I see Diederik says he has logged in before activating the account. Yeah, so you just need to also activate the account first and log in.
In the breakout room, they're almost done. They're extracting the files. So once they join, I think we can continue with the overview.
Okay, great. By the way, we will also share these slides with you a bit later, maybe before the annotation exercise, so that you can refer back to everything. For those of you who are done with all 3 steps, you can have a look at the interface, maybe play around with it, get familiar with it, but we are going to go through it step by step as well after everyone is finished with installation. Any questions so far with what we covered? No? How many of you have already heard of or used Hypothesis before? You can raise your hand in the chat. Okay, that's good. So it's a new tool for many of you. Atlas, I see Rose Semina. Yes, you used Atlas before. Nice. Okay, so I'm looking at Ruta. Should we proceed, Ruta? Is everything okay?
Yeah, Alex and Karina are joining back.
Okay. So I guess we can continue then. Hopefully, most of you are installed with Hypothesis, barring maybe 1 or 2 issues. Just to also reiterate here that this is a development version of the extension that we developed in the project. So we are in the process of testing it. And so we do expect a bug or 2 here and there. So be mindful of that. And another known issue is, which some of you have already experienced, is when you reload Chrome. In other words, when you close Chrome and start it up again, the extension may automatically update to 1.799. This is just the way Chrome is at the moment. We're investigating how to work around this issue. But for the time being, it doesn't have to stop you. What you can do is make sure that you don't close and reopen Chrome. That's one option. The other option is if you close and reopen, just make sure to reinstall the extension, which is just 2 clicks. You have to remove the existing hypothesis and then load unpacked again to the same folder, and then it should be sorted. We are planning to publish this extension once we have a more mature version of the tool on the Chrome Web Store, where it should be just 1 click to install it, just like any other extension on the Chrome. Now we'll go through the interface, because many of you indicated that all of you indicated that you're not familiar with Hypothesis. So let's have a look at the interface. What you can do is follow along with me. You can open up Hypothesis in your browser, just like you see in the screenshot here on the slides. Okay, so if you look on the top right of your Chrome browser, you'll see a little arrow if you haven't opened up Hypothesis yet. And if you click on the arrow, it'll open up this window pane to show you the full screen. And at the top, you will see 5 options. And the third option from the left in the menu is the custom tags interface. And if you click on that, it's this little arrow pointing upwards. If you click on that, it'll open up the additional functionality which we developed in this project to Hypothesis. And it's what you see on the orange box here in this screenshot. And this panel allows you to import your own annotation tags that you predefine for your specific project into Hypothesis, so that it will automatically recommend these tags for you while you're annotating. Then we have at the bottom in the green box, you have the annotations, add annotations panel. This is where you actually enter in your tags, your annotation tags, or any comments on the annotations that you add to a piece of text. If you look at the red box here, it's just any piece of text that you annotate. If you use your mouse and your cursor and you highlight a piece of text, you'll see a little box popping up with 2 options, annotate and highlight. So if you click on annotate, it'll open up this green box for you to add your annotations to. So you can test that out now if you want. Click around and get a feel for the interface. If we zoom in a little bit to the add annotations panel, just to make it a bit clearer for you what each thing means. And again, I will share these slides with you later on, so you don't have to memorize this. You can refer back to this later on. In the purple box at the top, you'll see a piece of text there indicating the group, the annotation group, which these annotations will be added to. In Hypothesis, you have the public group by default. If it says public there, it means that you're going to post your annotation to the public world. So anybody who has access to that website or that PDF file will be able to read your annotation and access it. But you can create groups, private groups, where only people in that group can read those annotations. And like you see in this screenshot, we created one called NWA Annotations 1.0. Below that, you have a little box to indicate what's the highlighted text that you just highlighted. The red box is where you can type in notes in natural language or discussion points and chats. Basically, you use that to communicate with other annotators in your group on your project, where you can discuss any information about that annotation. And box 4, the orange one, is the most interesting one for this workshop, is where you add annotation tags. So predefined tags or phrases that you can attach to a piece of text. And we'll make extensive use of that in this workshop. While you're typing in this tag box, you'll see this little green box popping up with recommendations for tags. And this will be accessed from the file which you upload with your custom tags. And if you hover over each of these tags, you can also see a tooltip, which is a description of that tag once you type them into that box. If I zoom in just to the orange box, so box number 2 from this slide, then you'll see something like this, where at the top in box 1, you can type in or just paste a URL, so the address to where you can locate a file, a comma-separated file, CSV file, which is holding all your custom tags for your project. And we'll get into how to write this CSV file in a moment. But you can specify that here if you want to load it directly from the web. Alternatively, if you have the file on your local computer, you can use the green box 3 there, where you click choose file, and then you load the CSV file from your computer. Box 2, the blue box, is just to indicate if you want to replace the existing tags in your hypothesis. So overwrite, forget all the other tags. I just want these new tags that I upload, or just add these tags to the list of tags that I already have in my hypothesis. Right, so this is how your CSV file should look if you want to specify your own custom tags. You have at least one column, the column A. Column B and C are optional, so you don't need to have these columns if you don't want to. Column A is mandatory. And column A lists all your tag names. Column B, if you choose to specify it, is a description for each tag, which will display as a tooltip if you hover over that tag. And column C is a category of the tag. So this is, according to you, maybe you have certain tags that fall into natural groups. So for example, if you're doing natural language processing, maybe you're interested in parts of speech, like you're interested in nouns and adjectives and verbs. But you get different types of nouns, different types of adjectives, different types of verbs. So you can have categories like noun or verb or adjective. And you can have that here in the third column, in column C. The header, where it says text, tooltip, and tag type, is optional. So you don't have to include those. But if you do include a header, it has to look like that. It has to be exactly those words. And once you save your file, you should save it as a CSV file, which has a .csv extension. So you'd open up a text editor and type out all this information, and then you save it as a .csv file. Comma-separated files, as the name suggests, have commas separating each item in each row. So if you look at the file for this in a text editor, it'll say tag 1, comma, first tag, comma, type A. Right? So you don't see that in the screenshot, but remember, if you're writing this down in your files, it should have a comma. Yes, as I indicated before, you can have private groups in Hypothesis just to keep the annotation specific to a certain group of people. How do I create a private group? If you click on the public icon at the top of the screen in Hypothesis, it'll open up this drop-down list of all your groups. And if you don't have any there, the first option will be this new private group option. If you click on that, it'll open what you see on the right-hand side here, which is a place to specify the name and the description of the group. Once you specify that, you click on Create Group, and it will add that group to this list that you see on the left-hand side.
Thank you, Cody. So in the next 10 minutes, I will talk a little bit more about annotation guidelines, what they are, and how to create them for your specific project. And I'll share some examples also of legal annotation projects that are not so many, unfortunately. So what are annotation guidelines? So these are basically the instructions that you are giving to the annotators. There are different components that you can include in annotation guidelines, but I would say the three most important components would be at the beginning, explaining in simple words of installation and setup of the text annotation tool. And of course, this workshop is all about Hypothesis tool, but whichever tool you choose to use, it's important that your annotators know exactly how to use it. Then the second component is a specification of how to import the text that they're annotating. So it will depend on your sources, whether it's a PDF file or a Word document or a web page. And then you also specify what part of the text. In Hypothesis, we call it highlighting. So you want to emphasize that spaces are not included or certain extra characters before and after the phrase or word are not included. And the third component, which is arguably the most important and unique for your own project, is the annotation scheme. So in annotation scheme, you want to specify the annotation tags you'll be using. You will define the tags, what you refer to, and you will include some examples to give your annotators an idea of what type of information they have to annotate. An additional thing that you can also include now, how Cody introduced it, are tooltips. So you can think of tooltips as hints for annotators. So once they're becoming more familiar with the annotation guidelines, they might not always go back to the full document of guidelines, but they could have a hint during the annotation process to remind them what the tag refers to. And then we wanted to share an example of annotation guidelines from biomedical domain. So maybe Marcus or Cody, you could paste the link in the chat as well. So you can have a look, a scroll through annotation guidelines and how an example of that could look like. There can, of course, be differences depending on the information you want to annotate, but these guidelines include all these three components that I explained. And then I wanted to talk about a few aspects that you have to keep in mind when you're starting your project. One very important aspect is to know your data. So you have your research question in mind, what you would like to do with the data. And then the first step would to be really investigate how your data looks like. For example, if you want to use case law as your case study, I would really suggest reading through several cases to already notice what patterns you can identify and what information you would want the annotators to annotate later on. Then secondly, you have to look at the type of information you would want to annotate. And here there are different examples of different projects annotating shorter or longer pieces of information. You could start by annotating words only. For example, you might want to look only at place names and instruct your annotators to only look at city names, let's say Maastricht, Amsterdam, Utrecht in the text, and that's all you're interested in, and that answers your research questions. You might want to look at phrases or even concepts. So again, in the legal domain, you might want to identify all instances of legal interpretation in a text or all cases that mention that. Or maybe you're interested in burden of proof and specifically on balance of probabilities. So again, you would specify that you're looking for these phrases in the text. And then arguably the most complex way of type of information you might want to look at are argument levels. So you're looking at sentence level annotations. And again, you would need to specify whether you want to include 1, 2 sentences or what information this argument has to contain. Other aspects to look out for before you start designing your guidelines is to search for whether there are any existing guidelines on these topics that you could reuse, because starting from scratch is not always necessary. So if you can build on an existing project and if these guidelines are open source and they're well documented, you might want to use that as a starting point. They're not very common in law as of yet, but we do hope this area will grow and also the sharing and open access will become more common. And then lastly, when you're thinking of what information to include is to think of where you would draw your definitions of these tags from. In different legal projects, we've seen regulation being used as source. So looking how these concepts are defined in regulation and including that in your guidelines. Or in European Union, you could also use Eurovoc, which is a dictionary that defines certain terms, and it also supports multilingual annotations. These are choices we can't prescribe, but these are things you should consider at the very beginning of your annotation project. And then secondly, you have to think about who your annotators will be. It's very important to not only know your data, but also to know your team. So what sort of level of domain expertise will your annotators have? Are they expert lawyers? Are they legal researchers? Are they law students? Also, in which year of law school they are? It will really depend what sort of definitions, what sort of knowledge you can assume on their behalf when they're annotating. So when you're designing annotation guidelines, it's also important to test them on these target groups to see whether they fully understand your definitions or whether you need to simplify them or use different language for them to come across. And then two more aspects of your annotation team is it is very common that single documents are annotated by 2 or 3 annotators, so you can compare the inter-annotator agreement. So you don't have just the opinion or understanding of one person, but you can compare whether the accuracy is high level based on this group. And for that, you can also use task supervisors. For instance, in the NWA project, we would have 2 law students annotating documents, and then a supervisor looking at these annotations and seeing and deciding which one is the correct one or how to maybe revise the guidelines so both annotators would highlight the same text. And the last aspect, which is also very important, is training. Again, depending on whether your annotators have an expertise in the area or not, there will be need for some training, not only how to use the tool, but also how to identify the information in the documents. Again, a first-year law student would have quite different reading of a legal text than a third-year master's level or even PhD level annotator. And just to mention some reasons why one might want to focus more attention and more time to designing good annotation guidelines is that without them, there might be a temptation for annotators to use their own tags or to also identify incorrect information that just by intuition they might find useful. So here there's an example of Sally's being 16 years old, and let's say my annotation guidelines would say to tag that as age, but annotators might want to type it in with capital letters, and for computer reading this would be a different tag than if I just entered it in lower keys. And then the third question under annotation guidelines is how to convey the information, what you want to tag, to your annotators. So here I'm presenting an example of annotating court cases, which is a similar structure as the CSV file, but it provides a lot more information. So this will be part of the guidelines, and this is the annotation scheme. So in column A, you decide on a tag, and it's suggested that the tags are intuitive. So just by looking at the tag, you can already have an idea what you might need to annotate. But of course, you need definition and examples for annotators to really fully understand what is expected from them. So in column B, you can see some simple definitions. And here, referring back to the slide where I explained where to draw the definitions from, these could be drawn from legislation or different dictionaries, or if they're very simple, you can of course just write them up as long as they're understood by the general group of your annotators. And then in column C, you can see some examples. So for examples, it's important to include the different variations you might notice. For instance, for the date, it might be written in words, it might be written just a number separated by dashes. So the more examples from your data you give, the easier it is for annotators to follow, so they can make sure that they match the examples in their work. And then lastly, in column D, you can also add a tooltip. So just a short hint. So when they load the tags, and if they hover over the tag, they would see this tooltip giving basically them a hint. So a case underscore NO, maybe they forget that what it refers to. If they hover over that, they can see it's a case number. And if they forget, they can go to full guidelines and see, okay, this is the type of case number, this is the style that I have to annotate it with. And then the last thing on annotation guidelines, I would just like to emphasize that it is a reiterative process. So there will be a number of revisions. So in NWA project, we're now on the second round of revisions. You take into account the feedback from your annotators, and also you see how accurate their annotations have been. And based on that, you can revise either the wording or maybe even the length of phrase that you want to annotate. So it is a repetitive process. I would suggest it's better to run smaller experiments at the beginning before you deploy a full-on annotation, maybe on 100 documents. Just test it out on 5, 10 documents to see the results, revise it, and then revisit it again. I'll continue with examples. Two legal examples I wanted to present today. First one is Claudette project that Cody already mentioned a little bit earlier. It is a project based in European University Institute, and it builds a tool that automatically detects potentially unfair clauses in online contracts. So here we're looking at terms of service and privacy policies. And in this project, we based the definitions on European law. So we had Unfair Terms Directive and its annexes for definitions, and then General Data Protection Act for the privacy policy. And here we had 9 different tags. We didn't use Hypotheses for this project. We annotated in XML, but the idea is really similar. So you would have a short tag, then a tooltip, and then a full definition and examples. And here for each of the tags, we had 3 different levels of unfairness. So first, the annotator has to identify whether this clause talks about, let's say, J states for jurisdiction. So whether this clause talks about jurisdiction. And then if it is a fair clause, then we would put J1. So you can see in the second sentence, if you as a consumer can choose the residency country and based on that choose the court, then this jurisdictional clause is fair. In contrast, we would put J3 for unfair clauses. So here Dropbox forces consumers to take the action in Court of California. So as a European consumer, that would be seen as an unfair clause. So the levels were 1 for fair, 2 for partially fair, and 3 for definitely unfair. And we annotated 100 terms of service documents, and based on that, our collaborators from computer science department built a classification tool. Nowadays, you can just enter as a user a sentence from terms of service, and it will automatically detect whether it's fair or unfair. But behind this process, there's a lot of annotation that has to go in there. And then the second example is from the CBCM project. Here we're looking at cross-border company mobility transaction notices. We're using both PDF files and websites. So here there's an example of Irish transaction notice. So we started testing out Hypotheses tool for this, and annotation guidelines are structurally similar to the ones I mentioned before. So we have a tag, which is just abbreviation of what we're looking for, either transaction day or registry country. Then we give a short description. And here I have to note that the annotators we had were already fully trained. So they've been on the project for 2 or 3 years. So we could assume certain level of knowledge on the topic. And then examples, we also try to include examples in different languages because in CBCM project, they cover all European countries. So we wanted to make sure that the different spellings and different words involved would be reflected in the examples. Then we also wanted to show you some example of annotation use cases. These are not yet existing projects, but they might give you some ideas how you could use Hypotheses tool and what sort of project they could be involved in. Example that I've mentioned throughout the presentation already is case law scenario. So you might want to look at European case law or your national case law. And here, again, the type of annotation you want to do is up to you. You might want to start with very basic information, such as date or judge's name or case number. And you can work through that, increasing the complexity, and might look for the preliminary question that is involved or the outcome of the case. And that all can be identified within the text of the case. And then the second example I wanted to give is from the transaction notice scenarios. So here, the guidelines that I showed, let's say that's the back end for annotators, but what they actually see is the transaction notice and then the loaded Hypotheses tool on the side. And you can see how an annotator can identify the different parties involved in transaction notice, the date, the country, and other aspects as well. And for the next 2 examples, I'll hand it over to Cody.
Yes, thank you, Ruta. So this is an example of using social media, so annotating social media posts. In this case, it's Twitter. I have a student, a PhD student, who's working on identification of hate speech on social media. And in this video, which Ruta will play, the idea here is to show that you can annotate the posts where they are. You don't have to extract, for example, the tweets from the Twitter database or API. You can directly highlight using Hypothesis that information, and then you can provide these custom tags, like I mentioned, like I'm indicating in the video, and you can categorize the kind of hate, for example. So this is a project on hate speech, and in different jurisdictions, they have obviously different definitions for what constitutes hate speech. And so your tags might be dependent on that. So this is an example of natural language processing, where you can use the tool. There's two kind of main operations that are quite standard in natural language processing. One is called post tagging, part of speech tagging, where you specify where you want to identify what are the nouns and verbs, the parts of speech basically in a piece of text, nouns, verbs, adjectives, etc. So you can use this tool to, for example, train by giving data examples to show what are the nouns and verbs and adjectives in a particular piece of text online. And you can see there in the video what I've indicated. There are these standard tags that are used in natural language processing for these. And then there's also named entity recognition. In named entity recognition, here you're trying to identify notable places or people, so names of organizations, persons, quantities, what you want to specify, okay, this is a monetary value, and so on. So kind of these named entities in a piece of text. So here in this example, I'm highlighting Google, and I'm selecting hopefully an organization there to show that it's an organization. We can use this data to train natural language processing algorithms to identify in a piece of text, okay, that this is an organization name, or that's a country name, or that's a monetary value, like in this case, 2.8 billion pounds, etc. So that's how you can use it for natural language processing. This is versatile, and you don't have to use it for a specific task. You can use it for many different kinds of projects and purposes.
I have a question about the data that you are annotating. So I see that you are annotating websites. And then what if you want those websites to be offline? Because like every time you need to go back to the website to see the annotation, or you need to just save the website offline and then annotate it?
Yeah, so you can also do that if you want. For example, you can save it as a PDF. You can save the website or print it as a PDF. But I'm not sure what the benefit is for that.
Like, for example, in Twitter case, you annotated one of the posts, but then what if this post is deleted or this person blocked you?
That's a very good point that you mentioned about deleting, right? So for example, if a post gets deleted, the nice thing is your annotation will not be deleted. So your annotation will still be accessible via the Hypothesis interface. So you can log in and view your annotations there. And they're called orphan nodes. If the URL can't resolve to the page with the data, the node for the annotation is still there. So you can still access that after the page is not live anymore.
I have a related question, but I am not sure if it's getting ahead of ourselves. But since you mentioned XML, if I annotate in XML, in the text file, the annotations will be inside the text file. Is it possible to download what you annotate so that it's in the same place, the annotation and the text, or is it separate? Maybe that gets really ahead of ourselves to downloading what you have annotated.
Yeah, so we will cover exactly that, well, extracting these annotations. Once you make the annotations on Hypothesis, it's linked, right? So the text that you highlight and the URL to the page or the ID for the PDF file is stored alongside the annotation tags in one file. So you'll be able to see the highlighted text and your tags and the link to the URL of the page or the ID of the PDF. Yeah, very good questions. Thanks for asking those. I think we can move on to the annotations exercise, Ruta.
Yeah, the next task is to actually use the tool, and I've created several tasks for you to try out. So I'll ask Marcus to assign you in different breakout rooms and also to share the slides in the chat so you can follow the steps. If there's not enough time to do all the steps, I would really want to encourage you to get through at least the first 3. So to load the file, if you have a PDF file, or to open a web page that you want to annotate, and then annotate 5 tags. They can be as random as you want. And then try to also play around with the different interactive features. So the reply option or creating a private group rather than posting public. So you'll have half an hour for this exercise.
We are going to continue with the extraction exercise, which is now extracting the annotations that you've made in your annotations exercise previously. I hope you managed to use that exercise to get familiar with the tool, get familiar with the interface, and hopefully now it's much clearer how to create this CSV file, right, with your tags, your predefined tags, and then loading that into Hypothesis and using it to annotate your different pieces of text. I indicated before in the session why you would want to reuse these tags, right? So one example was for machine learning purposes or natural language processing. And Ruta also mentioned as well some examples like Claudette, where we can basically shown a lot of examples of these annotations, learn how to classify future texts which are not labeled, would predict labels for these new pieces of text. So that's one example why you would want to do that. Other examples could be to share these annotations with others, or analyze them empirically, maybe draw some diagrams and some charts by counting a certain number of tags of a certain type in a piece of text. There are 2 methods of how you can extract these annotations which you created. So method 1, which we're going to focus on today, is extraction of the annotations using John Udell's extraction tool, which is an online tool created by John Udell, who's one of the developers of the original default hypothesis. And method 2, if you're an experienced software developer, you can also extract annotations using the Python script available at that link, which I created, and it's customizable. So if you want to modify that for your specific purposes, then go ahead. That is my preferred method because it gives me more control over how I process the annotations that I extract and how I present them in a table or a tabular format. But method 1 is more user-friendly because you just go to a website and you input your details and then you click a button to download all the annotations. So we'll focus on that for now. So the link to this tool is given on this slide, and we've just shared the PDF and the PPTX slides that Marcus shared in the chat. So you can find the link in there and click on it, and you should be taken to a page which looks something like this. I'm gonna make this a bit larger so you can read. Can you give me a thumbs up if you manage to navigate to this page? Okay, good. Let's go into a little bit more detail about what these little boxes mean. If you look at the different boxes on the left-hand side, you'll see the top one says user, and that is a box to type in your username for Hypothesis. So that's if you want to search for annotations by that user. Then you can specify the group as well. So if you want to extract annotations from a specific group, you would do it from the second option there where it says group, and then there's a drop-down list where you can select public or one of your private groups which you created. The third box is to specify from where do you want to extract the annotations. So the URL to the file, if it's a PDF file, or if it's a website or web page, the URL to that web page where you want to extract those annotations from. And you're welcome to leave this out. So it's optional. And if you leave that out, it will try to extract all your annotations made on your user account from all the different documents and URLs that you annotated. those are the main options that I think we will use in this workshop. There are other advanced features here, which you can see at the bottom of the screen. I see Ous has a question about this.
Yeah, only about the URL. If it is a PDF on my laptop, what URL should I put there?
You can try the following. So let me find a PDF example. So let's take an example PDF and drop it in here. So this is just a article. I will start hypothesis. And so if I want to extract annotations from this guy, I just need to take this URL. Well, first, let's make some annotations on here. There's some examples. Okay, so I put it as a public annotation.
I think before you copy the URL, you have to close the hypothesis extension, so then the link actually changes back to the actual PDF location.
Ah, yes. So you need not the hypothesis one, you need the actual. So if I need to load this, thanks, Tobias. Yeah, so you need this URL. Where is it on your file system? Oh, it doesn't find any yet, but it does find the file. That's weird. Let's see.
Wasn't the UDEL one only for actual online ones? That's what I thought, right?
Let's see. Let's try it again, maybe refresh it. Yeah, it could be that it's only focusing on web pages. But if you want to have a look at your annotations on the PDF, what you can also do is go to your hypothesis account. Hypothesis, welcome. You can go to your hypothesis account here, and you should be able to find your annotation in here. Yeah, indeed. So I think it's focusing only on web pages. So if you want to extract the PDF information, you would need to use this Python script. So this is the script over here. But let's not cover that for now, I think, because otherwise we have to get set up with that, and that might take some time. But we can discuss this maybe offline out if you want to extract from PDF. Let's assume then for this exercise that we focus on the web pages. There's an optional box here for hypothesis API token, and that is for when you want to access annotations from a private group, not in the public domain. You need to authenticate. You need to show that you are the person that belongs to that group. And to do that, you need an API token. And how do you get that? Well, to access the token, you need to click on this link, hypothesis account developer, and it should show you this string of characters here. And this is your token, which you can use in that box. And you would paste it here. Mine is already pasted in, so you can see it's not asking me for one at the moment. And then, yeah, so step one is to enter in the URL, like I mentioned, to the document that you're annotating. You enter in the username and then the group. And then it should load a list of your annotations on the right-hand side here automatically. And when you're ready to export, then you can click on one of the three formats at the top of the screen, HTML, CSV, or JSON. And here's a little video to show you what it looks like when you do that. Once you have the list, click on the format and then click on the little save icon, and then it will download that to your computer. I mentioned how to find the API token, and now we'll go into the exercise. So those of you who have PDFs, maybe what you can do to try this out is annotate a web page of your choice with some annotations and then test the extraction as well from that web page. Yes, any questions so far?
I have a question. So
yes.
in the previous exercise that I tried to annotate an HTML file, but I couldn't because the hypothesis couldn't do that. So what is your suggestion in this situation? Do I print it into PDF or I just try to change it to another file or convert it to another file?
You mean it's an HTML file which is on your local machine?
Yes.
Right. Okay. In that case, you could publish that HTML page if it's a page that is not sensitive. You can publish it on a website or a GitHub pages, and then you can annotate it there. As an alternative, indeed, you can convert it to a PDF. So print it out and then annotate the PDF. Those would be my options. Okay, so without further ado, I think we can move into the breakout groups now. I think Marcus will create some breakout groups again, and we can tackle this task together.